Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Day for Adventure, the premier outdoor podcast that'll get you off your butt and outside. I'm Trevor.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Will.
And this week, we're going to talk about phones and if you should use them when camping, if you should bring them while camping, and if you do decide to bring it, how to do so. So just first off, should you bring your phone? Personally, I never really cared if anyone in my group brought a phone with them. We get annoyed if someone's face was shoved into it 24/7, but I'm not the biggest person to use my phone. Like, if the day's over and I'm in my tent, yeah, I'll probably go through social media. What 20-year-old doesn't do that? But just constantly on it, I never really am, so I never have seen a problem with them in the outdoors. What do you guys think?
My thing about phones is I used to be very anti-phone, like when I was a lot younger. But over the years, especially as phones have progressed, I have kind of viewed them a lot more as a utility. So I've grown a much more positive opinion about bringing phones on campouts and stuff.
Yeah, I think it can be a useful tool, but I personally really value separating technology and kind of even the outside world when I'm out camping. So even if I bring it, I usually don't like having it out.
And Will, one of your things, right, was you usually have it off or in your backpack, don't you?
Oh yeah, in general, when on camping trips, I will usually have my phone off in ideally a plastic baggie, and then I'll just toss it in my pack so I can take it out in an emergency. Otherwise, if I'm hiking, it'll be turned off or on Do Not Disturb in a pocket, just because I'm usually either using it for navigation to the event, such as we have some trail maps that can get us almost to the exact trailhead, and then we can turn off our phones and just use a paper map when we're there. But when we are driving out, the GPS features are really helpful.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I've ever owned a normal GPS, but I usually tend to always have mine in my pocket. Now, my phone, whether I'm camping or not, is on vibrate just because I'm so used to having to have it on vibrate at school or getting yelled at. But mine tends to stay in my pocket almost the entirety of the trip.
Well, I think we might as well kind of get started up into talking about like what reasons you might decide to bring a phone if you don't really know if you want to. So one of the main reasons why I've kind of shifted my opinion on phones in general over the last few years has really been this kind of the concept of there's an app for that. The whole concept of there's an app for that really is that it allows people who aren't really able to afford the real deal of a certain utility like a GPS or like a compass, I guess, or some other kinds of very practical tools that you might use out in the wilderness, like manuals and other such things. It allows you to carry those around, and to me that's really helpful and actually really useful when you are just out with a lot of people who don't know what they're doing. So if you're bringing other people like your friends or your girlfriend along, kind of a nice thing to have on hand. Phones generally are a heck of a lot lighter than a lot of other forms of communication, like, radio. That's a big bulky item, whereas a phone is a lot more slimmed down. It's more compact. It's just so much more practical. And kind of the big thing about this, and I think this kind of relates to pretty much all of my points about why I think phones have some serious pros, is that phones are always going to be way better for like, just kind of chilling or hanging out or like the pleasure style of camping and just going out to have some fun rather than more professional. I'm going out to be far away from society for a long period of time. So it just kind of, for me, because that's kind of how I view camping in general, that's why I prefer to bring my phone along with me for a lot of those utilities, because I don't really want to get like my cuffs wet. I want to wade into the pool and not have to worry about my head, right? That's my opinion. I don't know. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I think that phones are a great multi-use tool if using properly. I personally like using, if I do have my phone out or I'm just going to be using it on the outdoors trip, as either a makeshift camera, since I don't own a dedicated camera and they're heavier, and I don't want to carry the extra weight. And then possibly as an alarm if I have to get up at a certain time.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I use my phone as an alarm so much. I mean, it's my only alarm when I'm outside of camping, but when I'm camping and you have like dedicated wake up times, like when I was staffing the National Jamboree, I was a trek guide, and that just meant I would take kids up and down a mountain. I would have to get to their site as they're eating breakfast, which meant I was getting up around 4 a.m., 4:15, so I get up, brush my teeth, put clothes on, all that fun jazz, get my breakfast in, hike however many miles it is to their site, and then up a hill. My phone was my alarm, and if I didn't have it, I would not have woke up on time for any of those. Another good thing, it keeps coming back to what they've said, is having it as a tool. My iPhone has a compass built in, and I've used the compass on this more times than I should admit, even though I own a good compass.
Oh boy.
Whoops. Sorry, it's already in my pocket. And the other one, since I do a decent amount of climbing, is something called Mountain Project. So I can check climbing routes around me. So if I going out specifically for climbing and I go to say Devil's Lake, because there's a ton of climbing there. It's one of the state parks here in Wisconsin. I can just pull up all the routes that circle around the lake, and it'll even give me directions on how to get there. Now, not like GPS directions, they're usually someone's written out directions, but better than just trying to find it. And then I don't have to bring a guidebook with me either. Buy the specific parks guidebook or even like the Wisconsin State guidebook. I just pull up my map and I'm looking at all 50 states in the US right now. It even has climbing across the world. Wow. I've never really zoomed out that far.
Yeah, and while there are a lot of pros, there are a fair amount of cons. And one of those cons, for me, and the biggest one, is that it could be a distraction from the outdoors.
Yeah.
Especially with social media. I'll admit I do not like social media in general. I use it for work, and I have a pretty much a kind of tolerate-hate relationship with it. And so when I'm outside, I don't want anything to be getting in the way of being with the outdoors and with the people.
Is that why you never respond to my DMs, Will?
Oh, on Instagram? Yeah, I don't have any social media besides Snapchat on my phone.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't like social media in general. And even right now, I'm taking like a 30-day break because it's been, I use Twitter for writing work, and I've been spending more time on it that's both not productive and not enjoyable. And so it's just a reset to make sure that nothing is getting habitual.
That's actually a pretty good plan, not gonna lie.
But you can't make those hour-long snap video updates of every single thing you're doing with your life. Cough, cough, certain people I've met.
No, I will only use social media sparingly. And ideally, if I'm doing anything about it related to the outdoors, I'll take the photos with it and then share when I'm back home.
Yeah,
but
that's not a bad idea.
Speaking of using it as a camera, my second con with phones is that they are relatively fragile and can be pretty expensive. It's technology, and with outdoors being the outdoors, your phone can see a lot of shit. It's not a big issue if you take care of it and you're careful, but you gotta be careful. And if it's out all the time, you're less likely to be careful with it. What about you, Ben?
Well, so you talk about fragile and expensive, and when I think of fragile and expensive, I always think about the battery issue with phones. So, of course, phones use lithium-ion batteries, and the problem with lithium-ion batteries is that they don't hold charges as well as other types of batteries. They have the advantage of being rechargeable, but in adverse environments, you will lose battery like nobody's business. So I'm going to share a little sin I've pulled. Last time I went to Philmont, I decided to bring my phone with me. And I had put Netflix on, and I had downloaded a couple of movies. The thing about it was, at the end of every day, I was absolutely toasted, and I was just like, I just need to cool off for the day, right? So I had that along, and honestly, I only made it through 3 movies before all the batteries were completely dead. One of the things you have to do if you bring your phone is you have to bring a rechargeable extra battery bank, and those can be very heavy. So when you're out backpacking for 7 days or 12 days or however long you're going to backpack, that is a weight that is just too much for what it's worth. So if your phone claims it's got a 24-hour battery, if you're out in the wilderness, it probably will last 4 or 5 hours at best. So you have to have a plan of how you're going to recharge it if you're going to bring it along. If you're just out camping and you got your car and you could just charge it in your car, that's awesome. But if you're out in the wilderness or you're out in the boonies and you can't do that, good luck, because you're just not going to be able to do that. And that becomes really, really difficult to deal with the other thing I have to say. And that is that when it comes down to it, if you decide to get a little more serious, so if you're doing something like film on Scout Ranch in New Mexico, or you're going out into the Rocky Mountains or on the Appalachian Trail, you run into the problem that you're not going to have connection probably half of the trip that you're on to 3/4 of the trip that you're on, which obviously that means that bringing your phone loses a lot of its utility that way. So at that point, it kind of makes you beg the question, why bring it in those cases? Like, I brought my phone to Philmont thinking, you know what, I'll probably use it for some pictures. And then it turned out that somebody brought a camera and I didn't need to take those pictures. And then with no signal to, send cool Snapchats or whatever off to people I knew, well, like, what's the point? What's the point in bringing your phone along in that case? So that's my thinking on kind of the issues when you're bringing a phone. Any of you guys got any comments on that or any other?
Oh, yeah. I want to build off the part where phones are fragile and expensive. I have ruined a phone at camp before, and I spent more than a month fighting with Apple to just get a replacement because it wasn't even my fault that the phone broke.
Oh, boy.
Will, you staffed Summit with me. So at the camp, all the roads are gravel, and they kick up so much dust. Well, I found out after a month of fighting with my phone that my screen wasn't put on fully or correctly or something, and the dust got underneath my screen and actually caused my entire phone to shut down and stop responding. So be careful. A little fair on that point, though, is I did spend 3 months out there. How long were you there, Will?
I want to say I had 2.5 billable months. So yeah, 2.5 months.
Yeah, so we were out there 2.5 to 3 months. I think I was out like a week longer than Will. So it's not like a week-long camp or a weekend-long camp that did it in, but it still did it in. Mm-hmm. Other cons I have, I kind of brought this up at the beginning, is, as you could probably tell this far into the podcast, most of us aren't too obsessed with our phones. I mean, Will has Snapchat, and that's it.
I have Snap and Instagram.
Yeah, it's a Snapchat and Instagram. That's probably the main ones all three of us
and
use.
I barely use that other for anything other than communication. So
yeah, but there are some people out there who just live on their phones. So, I mean, this goes partially into what Will was saying about it takes away from the outdoors, but also it just takes away from interacting with the people that you went camping with. All of my campouts and scouts, I mean, when I was younger, I had an iPod. I didn't get a phone until halfway through high school. So I had an iPod, so I couldn't even connect to the internet when camping. So it just became a glorified camera, really, at that point. But if someone was just like their whole head in their camera, just not paying attention to anyone, it basically cut them out from the trip, because we would go off and we would do our dumb things, or we would sit down on the pier watching the sunset or something, just talking. And if you're on your phone the entire time, it just takes away from both that sunset and the conversations we were having.
Yeah, and that's the same for just in general.
Sure, that's for people, daily life.
Be with people.
Mm-hmm. I have to butt in. I have actually lost a phone in a harbor. Um, I was so glad I bought that phone from my coworker for $10. It was her old phone. So, but that's just kind of another kind of thing that comes into the cons of phones. If you lose it, or if you get it damaged, or if it's not put together properly, that nature is a cruel mistress sometimes, and sometimes you don't get a phone back.
Yeah. Next thing I think we should hit on is if you do decide to bring your phone, how you implement those phones to your trip. So I guess the biggest one we hit on a bunch already is there's apps for phones. So I went a little bit into Mountain Project. That's what I use for climbing so I can find routes. I use my compass a lot, especially if it's a weekend trip. It just finding general directions. I'm not going for a super long hike. Are there any things that you guys implement or have people you've camped with implement when they bring their phones?
There are a few trail maps when we head to them. They're paid apps. It'll be in the description of the app, but it is essentially a trail GPS app where you can download maps onto your phone, and you can both keep track of where you are offline only through GPS, and it will give you exact coordinates. So when you plug it into your Google Maps, it'll flat out even tell you like how much you need to walk to go to the trailhead from the parking lot. It is.
Does it start with a G? I feel like I looked into it but decided not to buy it.
I'm not sure. It's something my dad uses a lot, especially when he and my younger brother, they did a lot of practice hikes and taking some more remote trails when I was off with you at Summit. Yeah, that's my tips for apps.
I got a good one. So if your group is the full gung-ho against phones, so like a lot of scout troops are this way, my troop was this way, it's just no phones. You have to keep in mind that at least one person per group. So if you go with a big group of like 20 people and you break into like groups of 5 to go hiking, each group needs to have either one phone or like an emergency radio or something, because accidents and emergencies always will happen. So even if you're fully gung-ho about not bringing a phone, at least one person has to have it. And you can make it somebody who just doesn't care about playing on their phone or something, or someone who has enough responsibility that they won't be playing on it in front of others. But just to keep yourself safe and the others you're with, you definitely have to have some type of communication. And especially even if you guys bring your phones and you're going somewhere where it doesn't have connection, then you need that emergency radio. And you need to know frequencies too.
Yeah, and bouncing off of that emergency prep, never have your phone be the only version of one of your 10 essentials. And the big ones I am talking about are illumination and navigation. Because if your phone dies, now you can't navigate. Or if your phone gets broken and you can't use a flashlight or navigate out. It's a huge safety risk.
Yeah, and I actually want to bounce off one thing that Ben was saying earlier with how quickly phones die. Ben, when your phone died super quickly, you were in New Mexico, right?
Yeah. Yes, of course I was.
Did you have airplane mode on?
I did. Actually, I had...
Oh, you did? Okay.
I had the entire phone completely shut off from all outside connection for the entire trip. The reason why the battery died so quickly was because of the massive changes in both pressure and in temperature, just due to the fact that we were in the mountain ranges. So,
that's fair.
And everybody who's ever been out west knows that weather in those regions can change in moments. And I would have it at the top of my backpack in the blazing sun, right? And then when we'd set up in the shade, which would be 20 degrees cooler, of course, you're going to have some trouble. And then when it gets to 50 degrees down at night from 80 degrees in the morning and afternoon, you're dealing with massive temperature shifts. So you got to bring a battery bank. There's no getting around that. But the question is that battery bank going to hold out for very long. And that's why usually if you're bringing some or a battery bank along, you got to have a massive one, like one that could charge your phone over 8 times over, so that it loses about half of that before you get to your first charge. So you can charge your phone once or twice before you know.
Yeah. So some people might be curious why I asked them if it was on airplane mode or whatever it's called for Android. One of the things that kills your battery really quickly, and if you live in a city or even the suburbs, you probably won't notice this, but when it is searching for a connection to just cellular, it takes a lot of battery life to do that. And it'll do it in the background, even when your phone is like not turned off but locked. It'll still be searching, trying to find a connection, and it'll constantly do that, and that just kills your battery. So throwing it on airplane mode actually stops that. Or you can just turn off your cellular data as well, and it stops the roaming for that. Another thing is, if you want to go with a smaller power bank, you can always look at getting ones that have solar panels built in. But to be completely fair, those solar panels take forever to charge anything. They're really more for emergency rather than an actual useful charging. But they can bring the weight down because then you only have one. I think mine charges my phone like 2.5 or 3 times, but then it has a solar panel built into it as well.
I looked into buying one of those before I went to Philmont last time. And what ended up kind of being the deal breaker for me was the fact that we were going to be out on the trail for about 10 days. Okay, we would have pretty good access for the most part to local camps. So it wasn't like we really, really needed a phone for emergency purposes. And the cost to benefit in that case was just not really there. So I ended up not buying one. But the key thing, I watched a lot of videos of really good trekking channels where they were talking about those setups. And what they were recommending those for was really for if you are going to be out in a place where you're not going to have any form, there's no way to get power to your system, and you're going to be out for a long period of time. Because then you could just hang it off the back of your backpack when it's sunny, be out for 7 or 8 hours, get 20% of your battery back, pull it out. Odds are if you're worn out at the end of the day, you're only going to use 10 to 20% of your battery. So it's a good emergency thing to carry around. But I think that for most people who probably are listening to this podcast, I honestly think the cost benefit of it is just not really there. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. And some of them get really big too. The like trifold ones, they get you more solar panel, but then they take up too much space. Or mine just has a solar panel across the brick itself, but that just gets less light to it. And I fully agree. Mine didn't cost too much, so I think the cost wasn't bad. It was probably about the same as a normal power bank, maybe a little bit more. But they just don't charge as much as people probably think they do.
Another comment about like how like we can implement our phones. So I think, again, I talk about like the casual usage of cell phones when you're out camping and you're out, just out in the outdoors. I always think that, I know William does not like social media, and I personally am not much of a fan of social media, but one of the best ways to probably get people interested in going out and having good times out in the wilderness, or going out to a national park or a state park or even a local park, is just posting on social media. People all your friends are going to be able to see what you're posting about what you're doing. So if you've got that connection and you're relatively close to your car and you can get it charged up and all that, you've got the advantage that you can, this adventure you maybe went by yourself or maybe with just 1 or 2 friends, but then right after that, you post up pictures and you find out that a couple of your friends that you're good friends with, apparently one of them's like, hey, there's a park up by me that's really cool. Check it out sometime. I've actually had that happen a few times. That's actually how I found Peninsula State Park. Was one of my friends saw that I was out at Devil's Lake, and they were like, hey, have you checked out Peninsula? And I was like, no, I haven't. And I almost went up there. If certain events had not happened, I would probably have gone up there this summer. But yeah, that's a really good usage of a phone. You can use it to get pictures up. You can use it to post photos or edit photos. It really is a very practical and pragmatic resource for if you are a bit more of a content creator or you just like to take photos and you're not really super keen on bringing a big bulky Canon multi-lens
Interchangeable lens.
interchangeable lensed camera like my older brother's friend Joey did when he went to film out the first time. So it just offers a more pragmatic approach to a lot of the complicated technological things that stop a lot of people from going out into the outdoors, like GPSs and compasses and stuff. It provides an entrance to it, and I think that's a really good way to implement a phone.
Yeah, and one quick comment I have before we end that is the camp I work at, which is one of the National Boy Scout camps, and a lot of Boy Scouts are against bringing your phone to the outdoors. It's actually pretty encouraged to bring your phone, mainly because, well, we have internet service out there, which is surprising enough. But it's so people will talk about the camp or post about the camp because it's pretty new. So we want to get that exposure that Ben was kind of talking about specifically for that camp, but also to get other people interested in whether it be scouting or just going outside. Does anyone have any closing comments about phones?
Yeah, I do. I think the big thing when you go outside is that you just need to be intentional. You need to remember why you're in the outdoors, whether that's be to enjoy nature or to be with friends, or even just to get cool photos, and to use your phone accordingly. As if you use it intentionally, it can enhance, but if you don't, it could become a distraction and really take away from why you're being there. And as long as you're staying safe and being responsible, phones are a tool. Use them how you want them. Next time, we'll be talking about how to stay safe on the trail. For now, this has been a day for adventure. Get off your butt, get outside, and have a fantastic time.